Good morning, everyone. Chris Prophy, musically obsessed. It looks like I'm in a haze. I'm in a morning haze. I'm not in a haze, actually. I'm feeling pretty good today. What I want to talk about today is Iron Butterfly. Now, I had done a collaboration video with the Tri-State Record Gang a while back with Bill from Vinylverse, Mike from Jam on Vinyl, Mike Guitar Player '07, and Dylan from the Record Spinner. And we were talking about bands that need a little bit more love in the VC. And one of the bands that I had mentioned was Iron Butterfly. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about Iron Butterfly and why you should really like them. So Iron Butterfly is a name that comes up when people are talking about psych, acid rock, hard rock, and the beginnings of heavy metal. And there's a reason why. They had that beginning sound that, formed the foundation of hard rock and heavy metal. They were formed in 1966 in San Diego. So they were part of that whole scene, that California music scene in the late 60s that was bubbling. Their first album was called Heavy. And I've got it both on vinyl and I also have it on CD. This came out on Atco in 1968. And this was a different lineup than would be in later albums. So let me tell you who the lineup is here. You've got Doug Ingle on vocals and organ, and he would go on to be in more albums with them. Daryl DeLoach on vocals, tambourine, and percussion. This would be his only album with Iron Butterfly. Danny Weiss on guitar. This would be his only album with Iron Butterfly. Jerry Penrod, bass and vocals. This would be his only album with Iron Butterfly. And Ron Bushy, drums. And Ron would be, go on to be in later albums with Iron Butterfly as well. So you have Doug Ingle and Ron Bushy as the, main players in this album, because the other three would move on to other things past this album. For a debut album, 1968, this is an amazing album. You start off with songs like Possession and Unconscious Power, very deep, heavy lyrics. Get Out of My Life, Woman, Gentle as It May Seem, You Can't Win, which is a great song, Solo, Look for the Sun, Fields of Sun, Stamped Ideas, and probably my favorite on here, the Iron Butterfly theme. If you have, and I said this in the video when I did the collaboration, if you've ever wondered if Iron Butterfly should be mentioned in the beginnings of hard rock and heavy metal, listen to the song Iron Butterfly Theme. It's an instrumental with a heavy, heavy guitar riff. And what set Iron Butterfly apart was the organ playing by Doug Ingle and his vocals. Doug Ingle's vocals are so deep and brooding and emotional, and he just has this I don't know, it's almost just like it reminds me sometimes of the 90s grunge singers where they would sing with like marbles in their mouth. It sort of has that vibe to it. Maybe he was one of the originators, I'm not sure, but his vocals are very, very deep, brooding, emotional. It adds to the heaviness of the music. And the organ playing was what set them apart and what even brought them to superstardom in the next album. So Heavy was 1968. The band pretty much broke up. Like I said, you had Daryl, Danny, and Jerry all leave. So you were left with Doug Ingle and Ron Bushy, and they basically had to reform Iron Butterfly. Well, what a way to reform Iron Butterfly, because in 1968, they came out with a landmark album, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. I have it on vinyl, and I want to show you this. I've shown this before. Talk about psych. That's what the vinyl looks like. This is a repress, obviously. This came out on Atco, and I also have it on CD. And what's cool about this CD, I'm sure you can still get this. The butterfly moves. So, you know, if you're listening to that at 4:20 in the afternoon, it's going to really freak you out. All right, so In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, the album that everybody knows Iron Butterfly for, and I understand why. It's a kick-ass album. So they bring in, well, you still have Doug Engel on vocals and church organ. Ron Bushy's still on drums, but they bring in Lee Dorman on bass and a young kid, Eric Braun, on guitar. He was only 17 years old during the recording of In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. I love these old albums because they give you like a little bio of each member. And reading these bios, Doug Engel, his father actually was a church organist. So that shows you where he, you know, got that influence from. And I love up here where they explain the name of Iron Butterfly. And this really explains their sound. It says iron, symbolic of something heavy as in sound. Butterfly, light, appealing, and versatile, an object that can be used freely in the imagination. And I think I said this in the video, in some video, maybe I didn't, I don't know, but that's what Iron Butterfly brought. They brought the light and the dark shades of music. And it's interesting that they used the word heavy here to explain iron. And this was even before the term heavy metal. So again, another reason why these guys should really be mentioned in the talks of early heavy metal. This is a killer album. As I said, you've got Doug Engel's really deep, heavy, brooding vocals. You've got the church organ. You've got Eric Braun just kicking ass on guitar. He's 17 years old. He's just, you know, taking the world by storm. You've got psych on here. You've got acid rock. You've got hard rock. You've got flower power. You've got a little bit of everything. I mean, look at that cover. That's like, reminds me of like early Pink Floyd as well. Right? So side one, Most Anything You Want, awesome song. Flowers and Beads, that's the flower power song. You can just picture people running through the streets of, you know, San Diego and San Francisco singing that song. My Mirage, heavy. Termination, heavier. Are You Happy? Heavy. So this album actually builds, and I noticed that when I was listening to this as a kid. The songs build to the climax, which is side 2. But if you haven't heard the song Are You Happy? Listen to that song. That ends side 1. That's a heavy freaking song. And then you've got the monster on side 2. 17 minutes, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. Now, most people know this story. And when I had heard the story, it made sense to me. I guess when Doug Engel was, you know, reforming Iron Butterfly after those other members left after the first band, you know, he was working on this new song, and he had been drinking quite a bit. So Ron Bushy had walked in and said, "Hey, you know, that's a great song. What's it called?" And I guess it was called In the Garden of Eden. But, you know, he had been drinking, Doug Engel, and when he said it, he's like, In the Garden of Eden. And it sounded like In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, and Ron Bushy, I guess, wrote it down and said, that's really cool. And it was cool. There was, everybody's like, what the heck is In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida? But it just sounds cool. It just rolls off your tongue, and it's just got that late 60s psych vibe to it. And you feel like you could say it to someone like, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. And like you'd cast a spell on them or something, but it's so cool. And I've mentioned this before too. You know, Slayer, thrash legends, they covered the song In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. So again, that's just another reason why Iron Butterfly should be mentioned in the beginnings of heavy metal. So, you know, if you don't have In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida in your collection, you've got to get it in your collection. I feel like that's like, you know, if we're talking about top albums to have in a beginner's collection, I would say that's a top 20 album in a beginner's record collection, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. It's just an awesome album. Okay, so next comes my favorite Iron Butterfly album. Yeah, it's not In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. It's Ball. And Ball came out on the Atco label in 1969. And I was reading, I've also got it on CD as well. And I was reading about this album this morning, and I didn't realize it charted at number 3 on Billboard. So it was a pretty big album. I guess it you know, with the success of In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, this album, you know, people were buying it. You know, I don't know how much more that they were liking it, you know, after In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, because I think after it charted so high, I think it sort of just faded away. There were a couple singles on the album, but it's not really remembered much. I think In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida overshadows this album. That's unfair, though. This is a great album. This is my favorite Iron Butterfly album. This is the same lineup as In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, but they just further expand the sound. The songs are more intricate. You know, you start with a song, In the Time of Our Lives. I've used that term brooding a lot today. That first track, In the Time of Our Lives, is brooding. It's heavy. It's building. It starts with a shaking, rattling amp sound that I used to get from my Fender when I was a kid. And then it just builds up into this heavy, heavy song. Then you've got Soul Experience. Listen to that song. Funky bass in that song. I love the song Real Fright. I hear a big-time Doors influence in that song. In the Crowds. What a soulful song. Listen to the guitar tone on that song. It's amazing. Eric Braun was a great guitarist. Excuse me. It Must Be Love. This should have been a single. Maybe it was a single, I'm not sure. But if it wasn't, it should have been. It's shuffling. It's wistful. And then in the middle, there's this like heavy guitar breakdown. And then there's a killer solo by Eric Braun. And again, he was probably, what, 18 at the time? Filled with Fear is probably my favorite song on this album. I get a big-time Doors influence again. And then it ends with Beldebeest, which is another amazing song. You really hear the organ in this song. It's got this great acid breakdown in the middle, and it's just a killer song. So this album, if you like Iron Butterfly, if you like In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, but you've never given Ball a chance, definitely check this album out. 1969, amazing. Then, in 1970, they came out with a live album, simply titled Iron Butterfly Live. A great live album. This is the Ball tour. So they open up with In the Time of Our Lives, and they do Filled with Fear, Soul Experience, You Can't Win, Are You Happy? That was the song I was telling you guys about. And then they end with a 19-minute version of In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. So, you know, classic live album from the 70s. I don't really hear this album talked about too much as a great live album. But, you know, we need to start talking about these guys. Okay, then there was a big time lineup change after Ball. You had Lee Dorman leave. Or I'm sorry, Lee Dorman didn't leave. I'm looking at my notes here. Eric Braun left. I'm sorry. The 18-year-old guitar virtuoso. Adios, he left. Troubles in Paradise, I guess. So they had a lineup change. And with this lineup change, Doug Engel, the main singer, organ player, he wanted to change Iron Butterfly's sound. So they came out in 1970 with an album called Metamorphosis. Well, we know the term metamorphosis means change, and this was a change in sound. You still had Doug Engel, you still had Lee Dorman on bass, you still had Ron Bushy on drums, but they bring in Mike Panera on guitar, and he also sings a couple songs in this album. El Rhino on guitar, and then you had Richard Potalor on sitar and 12-string, and Bill Cooper on 12-string. Okay, this is a very good album. It's not a favorite of mine, but it is still a very good album. It's less psych. It's less, you know, kind of acidy rock. It's more like biker rock. There's a little bit more funk in here. There's some acoustic ballads, and there's a little bit more blues in here. So it definitely has more of a 70s vibe to it. It's a really good album. I like it. It's just not one of my favorites. But some good tracks on here. You've got a song called New Day, which is a real groovy tune. I love it. Shady Lady, funky. Best Years of Our Life, that has Mike Panera on vocals. He's a pretty good vocalist. I prefer Doug Engel. Slower Than Guns, that's a real cool acoustic ballad. Stone Believer, check that song out. Really good song. Soldier in Our Town, another acoustic groovy song. Easy Rider, that's another killer track. And then Butterfly Blue, that's like a 13-minute song. Not it is. A 13-minute song sung by Mike Panera. It's blues. So I'm thinking of Chris, the blues guy. Check that song out, Butterfly Blue. So it's a real good album. It is a change in sound. They had some members leave, brought some new members in. I don't feel it's as strong as Ball and In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida or the debut album, but it still is a really good album. I kind of wish they didn't have Mike Panera on vocals. I don't like the two vocalist thing with this band. I really like Doug Engel on vocals. I think if he would have sung all the songs on this album, I think it would have been even better. That just in my opinion. But still a great album to check out. Metamorphosis from 1970. And then, here's where I'm probably going to annoy Ron Haggerty. And I'm sorry, Ron. I love you, buddy. I had talked in the video about where Iron Butterfly went next. And in 1974 and 1975, they released two albums called Scorching Beauty and Sun and Steel. And I have these on a BGO twofer. And I've said this before, if you've never checked out the BGO label, definitely check them out. Such a great label. They usually put 2 or 3 albums on one CD. Great liner notes. Just an amazing company and real quality releases. But as I said, these came out in 74, 75, and big time lineup change again. They brought Eric Braun came back. Remember that 18-year-old virtuoso on guitar? He came back. Not only is he playing guitar, he's also doing lead vocals on these 2 albums. Ron Bushy's still on drums, and then they bring in a guy, Phil Kramer, on bass. He also does lead vocals on one of the songs. And then Howard Reitzes? I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. He's on keyboards and vocals. And he does a combined lead vocal on one of the songs. On Sun and Steel, Eric Braun again on lead vocals and lead guitar, Ron Bushy drums, Phil Kramer bass. But then you have Bill DeMartins on keyboard, and he does lead vocal on one of the songs. So let me talk about these albums, because I was just listening to these again this morning. And Ron Haggerty was surprised with my comments about these albums, how I said they really didn't do too much for me. They weren't favorites of mine. And he came back and said, Chris, what are you talking about? These are like my favorite Iron Butterfly albums. So Ron, I listened to these again today. Here's what I'm going to say about these albums. The instrumentation is amazing. Okay? You get a prog. These came out in 74, 75. So it's miles away from In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. You get more of a prog vibe on these albums. And it's heavier. It's a crisper production. And the songs are, I feel like they're very upbeat and up-tempo, heavier. You definitely get that more metallic vibe in these albums. So the instrumentation on both of these albums is amazing. Here's what detracts for me. I'm sorry, Ron. I don't like Eric Braun's vocals. I just don't. And it's a shame, because listening to these this morning again, I really wish that Doug Engel was singing on these songs, because these 2 albums could have been maybe some of my favorites in the Iron Butterfly discography if Doug Engel was singing. But I just cannot get into Eric Braun's vocals. There's just something about them. They're sort of high and wavery and sort of flighty, and he doesn't seem to have much control over his vocal range. And this is nothing against Eric Braun. This is nothing against his guitar playing or anything. I'm just not feeling him as a lead vocalist. And it's a shame, because the music on these albums is awesome, but the vocals, I just can't listen to them. That's the reason. And you know, but Ron, I'm giving you a shout out. The music on these is awesome, but I can't give you love for the vocals though. But you know what? If you are into Iron Butterfly, if you're into 70s rock, if you're into albums that are sort of flew under the radar, you might want to check these albums out. Maybe they'll be your favorite albums. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe in like 5 years, I'll go back and say, wow, what was I thinking? These albums are amazing. But like I said, the music is amazing, just not into the vocals. Around this time, Lee Dorman, the bass player, left, and he went into be in the band Captain Beyond. And I know, Captain Beyond is thrown around quite a bit in the VC. Captain Beyond had vocals by Rod Evans, who was the original vocalist in the first 3 Deep Purple albums. So if you're into Deep Purple, Iron Butterfly, that whole like acid rock, hard rock, early, late 60s, early 70s, scene, check out Captain Beyond. And I know most of you know who they are. The only other thing I want to show you is I have this album, The Best of Iron Butterfly, Light and Heavy. This is a Rhino comp that came out in, the year is small, 1993, I want to say. And what's cool about this comp is that, well, first of all, if you're new to Iron Butterfly, this would be a great compilation album to check out. What's really cool about this, too, is you've got the song, I Can't Help But Deceive You, Little Girl. And that was not released on any albums. It was a single that was released around the time of Ball, but it wasn't really officially released on an album. I think they re-released Ball on CD, I think on the Collector's Choice label, and they included that as a bonus track. But I've got it on this comp. So, that's pretty neat. That's a reason to have this. You've got a single that wasn't released on any other album. I Can't Help But Deceive You, Little Girl. That's Iron Butterfly. I mean, if you guys are still watching this after 22 minutes, then either you really like me or you really like Iron Butterfly. But I understand if you like passed out, 15 minutes ago. Basically, the idea of this video is to just share the love of Iron Butterfly. They need to be talked about more. They're a great band. They're very talented. Doug Engel on vocals and organ set them apart. I feel like they should have been bigger than they were. I mean, I know In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida was a huge song and a huge album. My parents even talk about that song. They were like, yeah, we used to dance to it in college at frat parties and stuff like that. So I realized that song was huge, but they have so much other great music that needs to be discovered. And, even albums like Scorching Beauty and Sun and Steel, I mean, these are out there to discover as well, so there's a lot of great stuff. Give them a chance, branch out past In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. Let me know your thoughts, and hey, are there any other big time Iron Butterfly fans out there? I'd be interested to know if you guys could tell me any information that I don't know. Maybe I got something wrong. I'm just interested, so let me know. Listen, enjoy the rest of your day. And you know what? Go on YouTube, listen to these albums, Scorching Beauty and Sun and Steel. Tell me I'm wrong. I don't know. Maybe I am wrong. Maybe these are amazing albums and I'm just not seeing it. I don't know. All right, listen, enjoy the rest of your day. It looks like it's going to be a nice one. We actually got a little snow today in Poughkeepsie, New York. Yeah, snow in May. Listen to music.